Welcome to Growing Up, a podcast about children and young people. These podcasts were written and produced in association with the Living Assessments Project and funded by the Wellcome Trust.
This is the Spotlight series. I am Monique, your host from the University of Kent, and in this series my guests share their childhood memories from the UK and elsewhere in the world, from World War II to the 21st century, all true life stories, all unique reflections of their era. In this podcast, Riccardo shares memories of his happy childhood with his sister and his Italian parents, a close family, tea time by the beach hut, children parties in the garden. You will hear why an experiment of mixed gender education was cut short. And also you will learn Dad's unheard of method to tell his children off in true professional cartoonist fashion.
I'm Riccardo Giorgetti. I was born in London in 1953. And we lived in Camden Road in Camden Town. I think it's important that you understand a little bit about my parents because they were both Italian. My mother was from Turin and she was sent as a nurse in 1951 to the London Italian Hospital, which was in central London. And my father came over to work as a cartoon artist and very well known for things like creating the Cat Girl, etc. I have a sister who's a year older than me, and we had a happy childhood living in Camden Road. It was a large terraced house with a big jungle-like garden. And my first memories of being a child was playing probably at 3 or 4 years old in this jungle of a garden, back garden. In 1959, my parents brought us all down to Westgate for a holiday to see the coast near Margate. They fell in love with the area. In 1960, they moved to a house in Cliftonville, a lovely little bay, and my parents immediately got a beach hut. And I remember as a young child, every day after school, my sister and I would go straight down to the beach. And another thing that's always stuck in my mind was that my parents took in a tenant who lived on the top room, and he was from Nigeria. And it was the first experience that we'd actually seen a black person as a very young child as such, but we liked him a lot. And at one stage, he had to go back to Nigeria for 2 or 3 weeks. And those days, they had to go by boat. When he came back with a huge branch from a banana tree. The bananas were green. I'd been used to seeing yellow bananas. I'd never seen green bananas actually on a big branch. And I think I was probably 5 or 6 years old. It just stuck in my mind that. In 1960, we bought a house in Cliftonville, just a couple of minutes from the sea, and as I mentioned earlier, many, many happy memories as children, spending hours on the beach with our beach hut. My dad and mum would make tea outside the beach hut, and we would have our afternoon tea. And we spent hours and hours during the week on the beach exploring, especially when the tide was out. We loved that.
What happened with your dad's job? Did he commute? How did he manage being a cartoonist?
Okay, really interesting. He had his studio at home, so he didn't have to commute to work because basically he got up and he went to his studio. He would be sent scripts. He did artwork for very famous in those days, things like Valiant, Eagle, the Beano, famous comic. And he created the famous Cat Girl, which was in June School Friend, which was a girls' comic. What was wonderful about my parents is that my parents hardly ever shouted at us to tell us off. What my father and my mother would do, if we'd done something wrong, my father would say, right, you two stay there I'll be 2 minutes. He would run upstairs to his studio, literally 4 or 5 minutes, do a cartoon of what we'd done wrong and bring it down to us and show it to us. And of course, that sort of diffused the telling off part, and we would smile and laugh and realise what we'd done wrong because we'd had it there in black and white in front of us. And it was always a very, very funny cartoon, even if we'd done something really naughty. For example, my sister had a bad habit of not tidying up her room, even when we were 8 or 9. And so my father would do a cartoon of her amongst all her dolls and things on the floor and everything else, and then a cartoon next to it where the room's immaculate, and show it to my sister. And I just remember my sister saying, okay. I mean, she went upstairs and she looked at the cartoon and she actually tidied up the room. So there was no shouting or telling off ever. And we were brought up basically that way, which was a lovely way, I thought, to be brought up as children.
That's just brilliant. That's fabulous. I've never heard anything like it. What a wonderful parental method.
When we went to Italy on holiday for several months at a time, what would happen there was my father would bring all his materials for his artwork, and from London they would send a courier once a week to Italy to come and pick up the artwork he's done, and that courier would then catch the next train back. In those days it was train and ship, not planes, and take his artwork back in time for it to be printed, which enabled my father also to have holidays abroad.
Indeed, that almost beats the internet. Can you tell us everywhere wonderful you've been able to go?
With my parents being Italian, we would nearly always go to Italy. Before my father had a car, we would take the train all the way from ferry, first from Dover to Calais, and then the overnight train, the Orient Express in those days, which actually stopped at Genoa. It wasn't the luxurious Orient Express that people talk about. It was just ordinary couchettes in those days. Then later on, when my father bought the car, we drove down to Verona to see cousins in Verona, and then drive all the way to Genoa and spend the rest of the time with my aunt on the beach along the Ligurian coast.
And what is your best holiday memory?
The best holiday memory I have was the excitement of going through the St Gothard's, driving down the St Gothard's Pass, which were 36, if I can remember correctly, 36 or 39 hairpin bends going over the pass from Switzerland into Italy. And obviously, as little children, we were absolutely amazed at the mountains that were surrounding us. We'd never seen mountains because we'd been living in Kent, which had tiny little hills. And other memories was swimming in the Mediterranean, where both my sister and I, at a very young age, could swim. Really wonderful memories are swimming in beautiful, beautiful little coves where the mountains come down to the sea. And I just remember the water being so, so blue and transparent, which I wasn't quite used to over here with the sand and chalk waters of Margate.
Next, can you tell us about your school?
When we moved here in 1960, I went to Holy Trinity Primary School, which is near Cecil Square in Margate. It no longer exists. My first memories was, for some reason or other, one of the boys pushed me, and I think I pushed him back. And I think it was my very, very first fight, just before I started school. The head separated us, and we actually became best friends. 11 years old, I went to St Augustine's College, which was in Ramsgate at the time, run by Benedictine monks. And then later, St Augustine's Ramsgate decided to amalgamate with the Les Oiseaux girls' school run by nuns in Westgate. It's now called St Augustine's Westgate. It's no longer a school. the memories of that was the actual transition from being in an all-boys school going to a girls' school run by nuns. And I particularly remember the first day that we amalgamated and the boys and girls got together for the first time. Mother Superior had an assembly at one end of the school, and Father Bernard had an assembly with the boys at the other end of the school, saying that this is 1969, I think it was, or 70, and that now co-education is very important, etc., 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 and that we would be having classes together with the girls for the first time, which obviously us boys were quite excited. But the nuns, after 1 year of the experience of having boys and girls together, decided that no, it wasn't the right thing to do on religious, especially when, for example, in the garden of prayer, they were catching boys and girls kissing and snogging, which wasn't quite the right thing to do for the Catholic nuns, etc. So after a year, they moved away with all the girls, and we ended up being an all-boys school. So it's just another memory I have.
So you had a happy year as a mixed school, and that was it, basically. Did you enjoy lessons, and what were your favorite subjects?
In particular, I was really fascinated by science, physics, biology, chemistry, and my favorite subject was biology, anything to do with plants and animals. And in fact, that's what I went on to do my A-levels in biology, physics, and chemistry.
And did you do sports at school, and what were the facilities like?
I was a very, very, very sporty person. I definitely took after my father. I loved tennis. I started playing tennis while I was 6 or 7 years old, and I actually joined the Margate Lawn Tennis Club and represented the club in quite a few matches, and also won a few trophies as well. So tennis was my main sport. In school, we were a rugby school, so we were always playing rugby, not so much football. But we had terrific facilities. We had a big gym where we could do gymnastics. I used to go to the local swimming pool as well because I loved swimming. In school, the team sports were hockey and rugby, and then individual sports was tennis mainly and some badminton.
That sounds quite privileged to me. May I ask you if it was a paying school?
My parents, yes, both my sister and I had failed our 11 plus, and my parents wanted us to go to a paying school where we could hopefully do better. Both my sister and I ended up with 10, 12 O levels and a couple of A levels each, which sort of begs the question, does the 11 plus, some people mature maybe later than earlier? I was very happy at the school and made lots of friends from all over the world as well, which was quite interesting.
Were there affinity groups amongst pupils, like the cool gang, the nerds, maybe the bully ones? Were you aware of such groups, and were you part of one?
No, I don't think that there weren't any sort of little gangs in the school as such. It was a very, very friendly school, international. As I said, we had people from English people that maybe were based in embassies in different parts of the world. My memories is that we had group friendships, and there was never really any problems or trouble with gangs or bullying. So I think I was quite lucky in that respect that my experience, even at a young age, was that I was rarely bullied or I didn't see any bullying as such.
Okay, that's lucky. And I must say that I use the word gang in a joking kind of way, more like affinity groups.
Right.
Another question is that were there any disabled children in your school?
I just do not recall any disabled children at our school at all, but I did go on to qualify as a teacher, and I worked at what was known as Cunningham High School in Ramsgate. There were many, good 12, 13 handicapped children in wheelchairs. And what was wonderful to see was these roughy, toughy type kids that came from very bad backgrounds, and they always sort of protected and looked after and helped the handicapped children. It's just something that I always remember, because Cunningham School had a pretty bad reputation in the sense that a lot of kids came from really difficult home backgrounds, and some of them were quite roughy, toughy type, so we were brought up that way. But when there were children in wheelchairs, they made friends very, very, very quickly, and there was this protection of them, which I thought was absolutely brilliant.
Would you want to tell us now about your friends in your childhood? Did you have a best friend? What did you do together?
I had mentioned earlier in primary school that when I first went to primary school, I got in a fight and we became best friends. But that particular boy moved out of the area. The same thing happened when I went to St Augustine's, because 90% of the kids at St Augustine's and the girls were boarders there, whereas I was in fact a day boy. And there was a little bit of niggly-piggly between the boarders and the day boys. I remember when I first went to St Augustine's, a boy had sat on my desk during break time and I needed to get into my desk, and we got into a little bit of a scuffle, and he was a boarder and I was a day boy, so that made it even more interesting. But we became best friends. His name was Robert. Many, many adventures in and out of school together, because he was a boarder, lived in Raynham, and he would come down to visit me and I would go up to visit him.
Did you ever have a friend who got, or even an acquaintance who got into trouble, real trouble?
Not real trouble. I remember a friend of mine, we went into a shop, we must have been about 12 or 13 years old, and he took some sweets and put them in his pocket and didn't pay for it. And I was in absolute shock, especially when the shopkeeper called my friend over and checked his pockets. And unbeknown to me and unbeknown to the shopkeeper, what he had done, he'd made a hole in his pocket at the bottom so that he could slide the sweets that would go into the lining, so that when the shopkeeper looked in the pockets, he couldn't find anything.
Well, that sounds like a professional trick to me. Were you in the Scouts?
Yes, I did. I was actually in the Scouts. My sister was in the Girl Guides and I joined the Scouts. I loved it, especially, again, I was probably 10 or 12 years old, and we would go away for long weekend camping, and it was my first experience of actually sleeping in a tent in the middle of a wood.
Did you get pocket money or money as gift or reward for chores? And if you did, how did you spend it?
Even at a very young age, we would get pocket money once a week. My earliest memories was going always with my mum to the corner sweet shop, and we would spend, again, I'm talking about when we were probably 7 or 8 years old, spend most of our pocket money on sweets and chocolate. Later on, I think in my teens, both my sister and I were rewarded with financial little gifts if we'd done something good, and they would just suddenly appear. My parents said, "You've done this today, that's absolutely brilliant, well done, here's a fiver," And both my sister and I, we were very close, my sister and I. We used to talk an awful lot about what we would do with the money. And we both decided to save the money and buy fairly expensive things. I remember saving up and buying my very, very first cassette recorder. And I remember my sister saving up and buying her first record player. And we're talking about 12, 13 years old.
Did you and your family have your meals together?
Of course, being Italian, very family orientated, we always had our meals together. And the fact that my father worked at home as well during the week, we would, if we were at home and not at school during the holidays, we would have small lunch. And of course, the evening meals were very, very, very important. That was our main meal. You can imagine the type of food we were eating, which was very, very, very Italian.
What was your favorite meal, thinking about special occasions? Like, would it be when there were guests around? Would it be something like a Sunday lunch? Or, well, an Italian one? Or Christmas? Tell me.
Most of our Sunday lunches, my mum was very, very, very good because she would also, notwithstanding she was Italian, our Sunday lunch would always be a roast of some sort, if not a roast chicken, a roast beef. But she and my father and us as children, we love Yorkshire puddings, Yorkshire puddings. And I remember that we so looked forward to our Yorkshire puddings and gravy. And the other thing, probably from the age of 6 or 7, on our birthday, we would invite our 6 and 7-year-old friends over. My parents would prepare a sort of buffet. And again, happy memories of mixture of Italian and English food for us youngsters, and many, many parties with friends, especially in our back garden.
What was your favorite treat?
Do you mean treat or food?
Whichever you want. Favorite?
I did love the way that my mother made this spaghetti bolognese. There is spaghetti bolognese and there is spaghetti bolognese, but she made it particularly very, very, very good. And on the English side was treacle puddings, treacle sponge pudding with a lovely golden syrup.
It's nice to be between two cultures. What foods did you dislike?
I remember as a child eating everything, but for some reason or other, mince pies, although I love raisins and currants and so on by themselves, I think I must have had a very bad experience with a mince pie when I was a little child, because the one thing that puts me off eating even today is a mince pie.
Do you remember going to see the doctors?
One of the reasons why my parents came to visit Westgate was that in the 1950s, there was the famous London smog and pollution from all coal fires and everything else. I was diagnosed with having a slightly left collapsed lung when I was, I think, 9 years old. And the doctor suggested that I should go down to the seaside, and that's why my parents actually chose Westgate to come and spend a holiday, so that hopefully my lung would get better and away from the smog. And so that's my first memory of doctors and whatever. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks we stayed in Westgate, and in fact my lungs did get better, and it was all down to the pollution of the 1950s in London. The 3 weeks by the seaside had totally basically cured my lung, which was quite surprising.
When were you the happiest during your childhood?
I think the happiest part of my childhood was when we moved down to Cliftonville, and we were so close to the beach, and we lived in a corner house with a big garden, so lots of parties in the garden with my friends. Just the fact that every day after school we would take the bus and not go home but straight down to the beach hut, where our parents would be waiting there for us to make us afternoon tea before we spent up till 9-10 o'clock on the beach in those days.
Well, sounds like your life was a wonderful long holiday. There must have been times where you were upset or worried about certain things. Who did you go to for support?
I think, like most children, you would go to one parent, and then if you didn't get your way with one parent, you would go to the other parent. And I think that's both the ploy that my sister and I would have. But as I explained earlier, the answer would always be an art cartoon of what we'd done or what we'd said.
How would you describe your childhood in very few words?
I think I was very, very, very lucky to have been brought up biculturally, from 2 different countries in a sense, because obviously I think I got the best of the Italian side and the best of the English side, which I think that certainly had a good influence. And I would describe my childhood as a very, very happy childhood and very fortunate that we were able to do so many things. And obviously I've got my parents to thank for that.
Is there an object from your childhood that holds a particular emotional importance to you?
Right, I think there are two items. One is a soft toy which was given to me when I was born, and it's a baby lamb, a beautiful little baby lamb, which has the same age as me now because I've kept it all my life. It's on my sofa. And the other item, which I no longer have, just remember saving up my pocket money and going out and buying this really cool looking cassette recorder, which I treasured and kept for a long, 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 long time.
Can you see today the influence your childhood experiences and upbringing have had on the person you are now?
I have a lot of friends and my partner that comments that I'm a very generous, happy person. I'm quite a positive person, and I think it's the way that I was brought up, and I try to show that positiveness, make other people happy where possible. I think, yes, certainly with my son, the way I've been brought up, and it's basically the way I've passed on things to him as well. And he seems to be a fairly happy young chap now. And that's basically it, I think.
Is there a particular smell, taste, or food that takes you back in time?
Music in particular, the other day they played a Pink Floyd track, which I hadn't heard for a long, long time, but certainly it brought me back memories of that particular time. We were teenagers then, obviously. The other thing is, it's the combination of the Yorkshire Terrier, not Yorkshire Terrier, sorry, the Yorkshire pudding, the Yorkshire pudding with my mum's special gravy. That every now and then, when I see Yorkshire pudding, brings me back memories.
I'm glad it's not Yorkshire Terrier.
I couldn't believe I said Yorkshire Terrier.
What advice would you give to your 10-year-old self?
I have one motto in life, which I think is very, very, very important, and that is do unto others as you have them do unto you. And think about that. I think that's very, very important, and that's what I try to instill in everybody.
Thank you so much, Riccardo. It's been brilliant listening to your childhood stories, and it's also positive.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's quite interesting recalling back all these memories as well. Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed this episode, follow us on Twitter at living_assess. To find out more, search online for the Living Assessments Project.